Minister, I think up to 9 a.m. this morning, 81 of our fellow citizens tragically lost their lives in 2019 on Irish roads. That includes 14 pedestrians, 45 drivers, 10 passengers, 8 motorcyclists, and 6 pedal cyclists. A tragic figure indeed, and higher, of course, at this stage than it was last year. Now, I've asked you about home zones in relation to housing estates and to built-up areas generally, and where not being more proactive in that regard, very slow speed zones, and secondly, how you are liaising with the Road Safety Authority to adopt maybe a much stronger approach to aggressive and very fast driving, which in many respects cases leads to tragic loss of life and injuries. Thanks, Minister.
I'd like to thank Deputy Broughan for once again raising a very important issue aimed at saving the lives of people on our roads, and I think in this case, particularly vulnerable people, including children, to which he's referring here, and vulnerable areas. While the Road Traffic Act 2004 sets default speed limits for various categories of roads, elected members of local authorities have the statutory responsibility for making special speed limit bylaws for roads in their area. Within the case of national roads, the consent of Transport and Infrastructure Ireland. The making of such bylaws is a reserved function of elected members. My department issued updated guidelines for setting and managing speed limits in Ireland in 2015 to assist local authorities in setting special speed limits, taking account of relevant national policy and local circumstances, including road safety. In the 2015 guidelines, provision was made for greater use of lower speed limits in urban areas. This includes greater use of 30 km/h speed limit, as used widely in the EU, and 30 km/h slow zones. This corresponds to 20 mph, the lowest limit in the UK. These slow zones can be introduced to increase safety for the most vulnerable on suitable roads, such as those immediately adjacent to play areas. Road authorities are asked to seriously consider lowering the speed limit from 50 km/h to 30 km/h in residential estates. Since 2015, 30 km/h speed limits have been applied in over 6,400 housing estates. Where a limit of 30 km/h is being implemented, local authorities and community groups should consider applying slow zones. My department has been funding this programme of work since 2015. Provision has also been made for a 20 km/h speed limit. The 20 km/h speed limit should only be used in very limited circumstances set out in the updated traffic signs manual. It is not intended to replace the 30 km/h speed limit as the norm in housing estates. In addition, my department in 2013 issued the design manual for urban roads and streets. This provides for improved design to support traffic calming and safer interaction between road users by encouraging. I'll give you the rest of the script.
Thank you, Deputy Broughan.
Well, 6,400 estates, residential estates, we have implemented signage and so on for slow zones. But and I know the remarks you make about 20 kilometres. I'm not sure that that's valid. That we shouldn't have scope for 20-25 kilometres. But I mean, again, if you look, I got some figures from the court service there recently, Minister, and it shows that in 2017, I think 26,000, nearly 26,500 speeding offences were taken before the courts, of which 6,634 were convicted. Similarly, 2018, nearly 23,000 speeding offences, of which 4,245 were convicted, and so far this year, almost 10,000 offences. So speeding clearly, even in the records of the court service, it clearly remains a very serious problem. So is it not time, Minister? And I was in the chamber, obviously, and I know Deputy Durkin probably remembers the debates with Deputy Seamus Brennan, I think at the time as Minister, that we went back to the 2004 Act, looked at the whole range of speed limits from the slow zones up to the 120, and perhaps did a total review of that on a procedure that would perhaps give us much safer roads.
Thank you, Deputy.
Yeah, I think we're probably on the same page, Deputy. The 20 km/h limit is very, very slow, and it is only meant to be used in special circumstances, like on a street which is pedestrianised for most of the day, but which allows limited access for delivery vehicles at certain times, or on a shared surface street in an urban area where there are no separate footways. And you can understand that, although the Deputy would be the first to point out that 30 kilometres per hour can be a killer in certain circumstances as well. And that obviously justifies the use of the slow zones. With reference to his mention of the speed limit reviews, yeah, local authorities have over the last years been reviewing speed limits on rural roads in accordance with the 2015 speed limit guidelines. It's a major exercise and the Deputy will be aware of it, but it should improve consistency in the application of speed limits across the country, which in turn should contribute to improved road safety. I've written to local authorities to urge that they complete their speed limit reviews urgently, and my officials have been pursuing them since. I'm pleased to say that as of April this year, 23 had completed their reviews, 5 were expecting completion in 2019, with only 3 not clearly indicating completion this year. And I think there is obviously a need for constant revision and review of speed limits of this sort in order to not just to produce consistency, but to reduce them in places where they're too high.
Is it time really that we should move towards the kind of Swedish Vision Zero approach, where it's taken for granted that unfortunately some drivers will make mistakes, and that's particularly the case at higher speeds, and that responsibility has to be, go back to the national authorities in relation to the limits themselves, but also to car manufacturers. We've had a situation where it's been, I think, 3 decades since we made our own cars, so we're relying on manufacturers abroad as far away as Japan and so on to make the vehicles. But is it time that perhaps we require them, as Volvo seems to be doing in Sweden, going down the road of having limiters, making people or ensuring rather that all cars, if you like, they do allow at reasonable speed for mistakes to be made, and of course other jurisdictions, Minister, they have special limits for adverse weather conditions, for sometimes for different speed limits for night driving, and so on. So is the time not now that we should look again at the 2004 Act and the other slight amendments we've had, and have a fundamental review of this whole territory to get rid of the kind of terrible casualties we still have? Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
The Deputy will be more aware, even than I am, that speed is one of the great killers in the road safety firmament, and it is something which causes a lot of deaths still in Ireland, despite the fact that our road safety figures are somewhat better. Speed remains a top killer and something which we must face up to. And I think the fact that you're facing it here mostly in the housing estates, the fact that we're reviewing the speed limits to try and introduce a consistency there is something which is acknowledging that, and which will hopefully keep the numbers of road deaths as low as possible. To tackle the Deputy's rather larger issue, to say we should look at some of the continental approaches to the speed problem. Yeah, I think I'd be open to any suggestions of any sort which I thought would work to save lives. I wouldn't turn anything down whatsoever. And at the moment, I'm in the process of putting forward a bill, a road traffic bill, which tackles the problem of speeding and addresses the problem with graduated speeding penalties for speeding, which will obviously be aimed at tackling this problem. But if the Deputy wishes to make amendments to that particular bill when it comes in, I will look at them as benignly and as favourably as possible.
Minister. Deputy Broughan.
Minister, in the earlier question, I referred to information that came to me from the court service in relation to the non-payment of fixed charge notices for speeding, drink driving and holding a mobile phone. But the figures indicate, again, quite clearly that large numbers of drivers are not having their licences recorded in court. For example, in relation to this year, in relation to speeding, the number of offences convicted was 1,628, while the number of driving licence recorded upon conviction was only 566. It's a similar picture in 2018-2017. So I just wonder, Minister, when is the information flow between the courts, the RSA, on Garda Síochána, when is it going to become streamlined and efficient so that on Garda Síochána will know, in fact, who is disqualified?
Thank you.
That's the answer. I'm optimistic that it won't be too long. I'll try and be a bit more specific. There has not been an improvement in the number of disqualified drivers surrendering their licences to the Road Safety Authority during the first 2 quarters of 2019. Of the drivers with a court disqualification, the surrender rate is between 18 and 20%. Of the number of drivers with penalty point disqualifications, the surrender rate is 35%. The requirement for a disqualified driver to surrender his or her licence is set out in the Road Traffic Licensing of Drivers Regulations 2006. Failure to comply with the requirement to surrender the licence is an offence in itself, and enforcement of the law is a matter for An Garda Síochána. I do not believe that the non-return of licences, unacceptable and illegal though it is the central issue. The number of disqualified drivers not returning their licence is not necessarily a proxy for the number of people who drive while disqualified. Some people will return their licences and still drive. Others will not return their licences but not drive. Therefore, awareness of the role of the RSA is hardly an issue. What we need to achieve compliance with the law is strong enforcement of the law against people driving while disqualified. In this context, the crucial legislative step was taken in the Road Traffic Act 2014, which empowered An Garda Síochána to arrest a person where they have reason to believe that the person is driving while disqualified. The penalty for driving while disqualified is a fine of up to a maximum of €5,000 and/or a prison term of up to 6 months. The penalty for non-return of a driving licence is the general penalty under the Road Traffic Acts, namely a fine of up to €1,000 for a first offence, up to €2,000 for a second offence, and up to €2,000 or up to 3 months in prison for a third or subsequent offence in a 12-month period. I am aware the Garda authorities are working so that details of specific drivers who are disqualified are readily available to the Garda on the ground. I understand that the initiative to that effect will be rolled out under the Garda Modernisation and Renewal Programme 2016-21. That programme sets out a pathway so that each Garda has the technical tools that will give them direct access to all the information they need as they interact with the public on the ground.
Shocking, aren't they? And you're saying that there's no improvement, you quoted there the Road Traffic Licensing of Drivers Regulation 2006, number 537 of 2006. Now, it's quite clear what the penalties are, but yet when you check with the Court Service, Minister, I was informed, for example, that in relation to disqualified drivers who are taken to court for not surrendering their licence during 2018, given, as you said, that it's a criminal offence, I was informed that just 8 people were actually taken to court, and the sanctions handed down. When I asked about the sanctions, I said most people were summoned, but in relation to those, no convictions, those 8, no convictions are recorded. So it clearly is something that your own Department of Justice, the Court Service, doesn't seem to be taken seriously enough, Minister. We constantly get these promises of action, and that it will be clarified. The Commissioner reporting to, I think, the PAC, was it, and so on, and to the police authority, but we're still waiting, and there can be no argument that in fact the numbers of those failing to comply with the surrender of licences, it is indeed a shocking situation, and one that yourself and the Minister for Justice, you still need to urgently address.
Thank you, Deputy. Matala.
Yeah, I accept what the Deputy says. I think the figures are pretty awful, and I think there is room for improvement. I think the improvement is coming and coming pretty rapidly. The issue of getting all the information together so that the Garda can have immediate access to this information is taking longer than I would have hoped, but I think it's coming very, very shortly. As the Deputy will know, drivers who are disqualified are required to return their licences to the RSA. So that is the first action that they have to take. But somewhere in some are simply ignoring that and many are not being pursued, and he's correct about that. The Department understands that the Garda initiative is at an advanced stage, and that this will extract details of any drivers who have been disqualified and failed to surrender their licence for dissemination to the local Gardaí. As of 2014, Gardaí also have the power to arrest those suspected of driving while disqualified. This is an important tool in dealing with the dangerous behaviour of driving while disqualified. The Department is satisfied that current legislation is adequate, both in creating these offences along with the penalties prescribed therein, and that the necessary powers have been given to the Gardaí to effectively deal with the issue. The Garda Mobility Programme is within the remit of the Department of Justice, and I understand that the handheld devices, which are the key to the solution of this problem, are at testing phase and subject to satisfactory appraisal are to be rolled out later this year. But I agree with the Deputy, this can't happen soon enough.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, just finally, I mean, I think we were told that the Committee of Public Accounts, the An Garda Síochána are preparing a series of actions to address the issue of non-surrender of licences, and that will cover, we were told, enforcement and public awareness. I think it was the Minister of Justice asked, that a Garda report would be provided on that matter. So I just wonder, is your department involved in that? Is there a collaborative report being done which will ensure that a programme of action will happen in this regard as soon as possible? Part of the problem, as you know, Minister, again, due to the impact of the economic policies of your government and the previous government, that I think at the end of March this year, we still had 704 members of An Garda Síochána assigned to road policing. And as you know, before the crash, I think the Cathaoirleach will recall, we had almost double that number of Gardaí who were carrying out this really critical function. So that's part of it. Now, I welcome the comments again, but we've been hearing about the handheld devices. We heard they work very brilliantly in the Limerick Garda division. So I think people are waiting. I think it was the government spent an extra 342 million this year on Garda ICT. So I think we want to see those devices working with An Garda Síochána all over the country, like as soon as possible, Minister. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, I agree with the Deputy about that. I want to see them working as soon as possible as well, because I don't want to be able to, I don't want to have to come before this House again and produce figures of that sort. I don't take direct responsibility for them, but they are figures which I'm unhappy to have to give you, but will give you at any stage that you want them, and they're figures which indicate that drivers who aren't handing in their licence while disqualified are on the whole not being prosecuted. The effect of that, I don't know what the effect of that is, but some of those people are obviously still driving around. Handing in their licences mightn't make a blind bit of difference. They might still be driving around, but they are committing an offence by not handing it in, and that's in itself unacceptable. And I believe that the fact that people might feel that they were going to be prosecuted, there was certainty of being prosecuted for this, might deter them. So I accept what the Deputy says. I accept the Deputy's criticisms, and I accept the fact that it can't come a day too early. Yeah, there are extra Gardaí in the traffic corps, but not as many as we'd like to see. And the fact of the matter is, as the Deputy quoted, I think so a few minutes ago in his earlier question, there are still, I think it was 84 people have died on the road this year. And any measures that we can take of the sort that he's mentioning, which contribute towards saving the lives of people, should be taken. And I think that his pursuit of this particular issue is one which is worthwhile, and I hope will bear fruit in the near future.
Thank you, Minister. And next.